remember the day my daughter Laura found the old workshop. It was a damp, dreary afternoon, the kind where the clouds hang low and heavy, threatening rain but never delivering. Laura had been restless all day, pacing the house, looking out the windows, itching for an adventure despite the gloomy weather. Finally, unable to stand the confines of our small home any longer, she grabbed her coat and headed out. "Just going for a walk, Dad," she called over her shoulder, her voice a mix of defiance and excitement. I watched from the window as her figure disappeared down the muddy path that led into town. Laura was always a curious child, spirited and fearless. At 12, she was on the cusp of those turbulent teenage years, still my little girl, but growing up fast. Her mother and I often exchanged worried glances when she wasn't looking, wondering how we'd handle the coming storm of adolescence. We didn't know then that a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would start in the most unexpected of places. She returned just before dinner, her eyes wide and bright, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Dad, you won't believe what I found!" she exclaimed, dropping her wet coat in the hallway and not even waiting for a reprimand. "There's an old building at the edge of town behind the old Thompson mill. It's full of dolls." "Dolls?" I echoed, a frown creasing my brow. Everyone in town knew about the old Thompson mill. It had been abandoned for years, and none of the kids in town ever went near it. They all said it was haunted. I had no idea there was a building full of dolls near the mill. "Yes, it's like a workshop or something. There are shelves and shelves of them. They're beautiful. Will you come with me to see them? I really want to show you. Please, Dad?" Her enthusiasm was infectious, but caution held me back. "Laura, it's not safe to go poking around old buildings. They could be dangerous." "But Dad, it's not just an old building. Someone made those dolls. They're art. You should see them." Her disappointment was palpable when I refused to go with her. I promised, however, that we could return together over the weekend. The reason I wanted to go was to assess the safety of the building, but I didn't tell her that. Just knowing that I'd accompany her on the weekend seemed to cheer her up. I tried to imagine why Laura would be interested in some dusty old dolls, but she seemed truly excited. There was a fire in her that almost worried me, like an obsession sparking in her young eyes. When the weekend finally came, Laura practically dragged me outdoors and towards the old Thompson mill. Sure enough, tucked away behind the decrepit mill through a narrow alley, there was a little building, shrouded in overgrown weeds and silence. "That's it, Dad!" Laura exclaimed. As we pushed open the creaking door, the musty smell of decay and old fabric hit us. The workshop was thick with dust and the scent of forgotten years. Inside, the dim light revealed rows of shelves lined with countless dolls, their glassy eyes reflecting our torchlight. Laura's face lit up with wonder and a hint of something else, recognition perhaps, or eerie fascination. I couldn't tell. As she reached out to touch a particularly ornate doll, I felt a chill. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it had to do with all those ghost stories I'd heard about the Thompson mill. And since we were so close, maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. What I didn't know then was that this workshop held secrets that perhaps should have remained hidden within its decaying walls. "Laura, this place looks like it could collapse. See how that wall over there is crumbling?" I said, pointing. I told her I didn't want her to come here anymore due to how old and fragile the building looked. Laura nodded and seemed to understand. Over the next few days, my wife and I noticed subtle changes in Laura. She seemed quieter, more withdrawn. She spent hours in her room, and at meals, she barely touched her food. When I asked her what was wrong, she just shrugged and said she was tired. But at night, I could hear her moving around, talking softly to herself. Or was she talking to someone else? Several weeks later, I found Laura in the living room, surrounded by dolls. Not just any dolls. These were dolls I recognized from the old workshop. They were indeed beautiful, with intricate clothing and glassy eyes that seemed almost lifelike. But there was something unsettling about them. Something in the way their eyes seemed to follow me around the room. It It actually felt as though they were literally watching me. But that couldn't be. Could it? Laura, where did you get these? I asked, my voice steady despite the chill running down my spine. I brought them from the workshop, she replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Laura, we talked about this. That place is dangerous, and these aren't yours to take. They wanted to come home with me, she said quietly, her eyes not meeting mine. They told me so. That was the first time I truly felt scared. Not the jump at shadows kind of scared, but a deep, crawling fear that something was very wrong. I decided then and there to visit this workshop myself, to see if I could figure out what was drawing my daughter back to that place. As I approached the decrepit workshop, I noticed the door was ajar, and as I stepped inside, the musty smell of decay seemed stronger somehow. Dolls lined the walls, their eyes glassy and vacant, yet somehow charged with a silent expectancy. They were everywhere, incomplete on workbenches, fully dressed in display cases, parts of them scattered across the floor. It was a dollmaker's paradise and a father's nightmare. On a dusty workbench, I found an old newspaper clipping about the original owner, a dollmaker named Marionette Claire. 60 years ago, she had been a renowned artisan, famous for her lifelike dolls, until one day she simply vanished without a trace. The article speculated on foul play, a tragic accident, or a sudden flight, but no one knew for sure what had happened to her. The more I explored, the more uneasy I became. The air felt thick, charged with a silent whispering that seemed just out of hearing. It was as if the dolls were communicating on a frequency only felt, not heard. Shaken, I left the workshop, taking one of the dolls with me, the one that looked most like the ones Laura had taken. Back home, I confronted Laura about the dolls. She cried, begged to keep them, claimed they were the only friends who understood her. It worried me to see her so attached to these inanimate objects, and I began to fear that her interest in them was bordering on obsession. What I didn't know then was that Laura wasn't the problem. We were dealing with something much worse than a simple obsession. That night, the noises started. At first, I don't think we even noticed the sounds. Soft thuds seemed to emanate from Laura's room, and whispers seemed to creep down the hallway. As the weeks went by, the disturbances grew more pronounced. Several times we would hear what sounded like things falling over, muffled voices, as if people were talking in another room. When my wife and I would look in on Laura, she'd be sound asleep. Things seemed normal, but I could swear the dolls around her seemed to have shifted positions, their painted eyes gleaming eerily in the moonlight. I started getting a sickening feeling that something was very wrong. With all the unexplained noises, it got harder for my wife and me to get sleep. Desperate for answers, we turned to experts in psychology and in the paranormal, as well as those versed in demonic lore. Psychologists could only offer theories that fell short of explaining the palpable malevolence that now permeated our home. Local historians and old acquaintances of the mysterious dollmaker, Marionette Claire, provided some background but no solutions. We began to realize we might be dealing with a malevolent spirit contained within the dolls. We sought out specialists in demonic interventions, hoping to sever the connection these spirits had forged with our world. The rituals were intense and draining, imbued with a tension that seemed to get rid of the darkness from our home. Believing the spirits to be expelled, we also got rid of the dolls, with the hope that the haunting would end. Peace returned, fragile but welcome. Eventually, for Laura's safety and our peace of mind, we moved away. Yet, in the whirlwind of our relief, I unwittingly forgot one doll. It was the doll I'd taken from the workshop all those weeks ago. I'd mindlessly stashed it away in a box, which ended up in the attic of our new home, forgotten amidst the upheaval. Life has resumed a semblance of normalcy. Yet, sometimes in the quiet depths of night, a soft whisper will drift down from the attic, stirring the silence with murmurs of secrets long held. Unseen by us all in the shadowed corners of the attic, the forsaken doll remains, out of its box, its glassy eyes fixed on the doorway, ever watchful for the next person to ascend into its dim domain.